Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Emily Cash with the FreightWaves Media team, and I'm happy to present this webinar in partnership with Tai Software. Today, we will unveil how a freight broker utilized Tai TMS to double their daily bookings. I am happy to be joined by Sean McGillicuddy, Chief Revenue Officer at Tai Software, and Ryan Renne, CEO and co-founder of FreightSaver. We will also have a live Q&A following the discussion, so make sure to have your questions ready for our presenters. Before we get started, I'd like to cover just a couple of housekeeping items. First, if you have any issues during the webinar, please feel free to access the help section or the audience chat function in your webinar console. If you have questions that you would like to ask Sean and Ryan, please enter those in the Q&A box in your console. We will answer as many of those as possible during the live audience Q&A following the discussion. We will also be sending a link to the recording of this webinar tomorrow if you'd like to view it on demand or share it with colleagues. And at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Sean to kick off today's discussion.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. And thanks everybody for attending the webinar. We're hoping to give brokers some really good tips here based on Ryan's experience in terms of just fighting through this tough market we've been in and how to be just as efficient as possible in terms of the amount of bookings you can do in a day. So you can see on the screen here, these are the key takeaways we're hoping to deliver in terms of this webinar. We want to hopefully give brokers that are attending this a faster quoting process. We want to give your team more confidence in their negotiation, and that's both with the shipper and with the carriers, depending on what side they're on. Faster communication process. With Tai, we do that through our email integrations to make it super easy to communicate with shippers and carriers right from the platform. And then increase carrier reutilization to stop you from having to depend so much on the load boards. And then overall, we think that will lower your exposure to carrier fraud. That's been a huge topic this year. And ultimately, and we'll hear from Ryan on this, but increasing your booking per rep. How do we get more out of if you have really talented staff members that are able to cover a lot of ground? How do we help them cover even more ground and get more bookings going? So before we get into it, I want to introduce our sort of guest of honor here. Ryan has been nice enough to jump on and tell us about his experience. So Ryan, would you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about FreightSaver?
Yeah, Sean, thanks for having us today. My name's Ryan Renne. I've been the CEO of FreightSaver for the past 10 years, but my time in the freight industry takes me back to the early 90s, where Buster Schwab and I developed a relationship and started working together for the last 30 years. And our company specializes in managed transportation and really with a primary focus on LTL and truckload.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro, Ryan. So what the main purpose of the webinar today is to hear from Ryan on his experience and how he leveraged the page that I'm going to show you in terms of his team being able to double their freight bookings per day per person. So that's a super interesting topic to hear about. And I mainly want to let him do a lot of the talking because he's been a broker for so long. He's been in the industry way longer than me. And I think that's where most brokers will probably get the most benefit from attending the webinar. But before we get into that, I want to give us some context around the page within Tai Software, within Tai TMS that Ryan will be talking about in terms of how he revamped his process around this page. So I'm going to just spend a couple minutes here digging into this part. Yeah, here we go. Digging into this and just giving you some context around how this page is utilized. And then we'll stop and we'll go back to Ryan and hear about his story and how he got his team much more efficient built around this page. So what you're looking at here is our truckload quoting page within Tai. And internally, we've been calling this the battle station for brokers because most of the time when you're going to war to try and win, when you're trying to win quotes and or win shipments from shippers, or you're trying to get shipments covered that were already committed and you've got to move really fast, our goal is to give your team a much faster way to accomplish the entire process. So what this page is all about is this is where you if a shipment comes in through an email or through an EDI, it can automatically be assigned. And I could literally go up here to my assignments and I could grab these committed shipments and bring them right over into this page. And that's the context for how we get here. But really the shipment details are here. And what this page does is whatever whatever information you type in here, you could actually build the load from here as well. But it's almost like querying all of your data and your entire network in order to figure out what your options are, what the pricing should be, and what carriers you could use on this shipment. So you see up top here, I've got my lane average. This would normally be the broker's logo and the broker's data. So I've got my own lane average over the last 6 months for this. But if I want to leverage any tools for pricing, I've got TruckStop, I've got FreightWaves, I've got green screens, and I can sit here and just compare my average to what the market's doing. It looks like the market's a little bit softer than what I normally do. So I'm going to probably try to be a little bit more aggressive about this page. Now, the goal is that your team, regardless of how much experience they have in the industry or how much experience they have on this particular lane, we want to make it so that the entire company's data feeds into this. And this allows your team to have a little bit more confidence when it comes to trying to put a price on this and get it back to the customer. So if it is a spot quote scenario, we could look at all this information. We could take a look at our quoting history across the board. And if we need to move really quickly, we could go ahead and put a price on this. And I've already got it set up for $8.50 as my target buy rate. I'm going to go ahead and just close this out. I've got my margin already built into this. So from here, I can quickly send an email blast out to these top carriers. And you can see I've got them starred. So I've got my favorite carriers starred here. And it allows my whole team to see who we are trying to build relationships with and who we're trying to reutilize instead of just relying too heavily on the load boards. Load boards are important, but most of the time you want those to be sort of a last resort in terms of being able to build your own network within your carrier database. So this just makes it super easy for everybody to constantly go back to the same carriers. The reason these carriers are coming up on this lane is based on what I had set up in my search criteria. So this is either similar lanes it could be, or it could be the same repeat lanes again and again. And we get an opportunity to see who quotes us most often on these lanes and who we like working with. Now you can see I actually already have some active quotes on this. So we already sent out the email. And the cool thing is Tai's integrated with your email. So it's really easy for us to just fire that off without it being, it's not a blind copy. It's not going out of, it's not like blind copying all the carriers. If I go into my sent emails, I'll see an individual email going out to all these carriers requesting the quote. And it goes with a link so that they could type in the quote for you. Now, not everybody does that, and it's pretty easy to just add a quote if I need to do it manually. But I can quickly blast out that email and get those quotes back. Now, the other cool thing about this is I can also see who have I run this with in the past, and I could get a little bit more information. So if I need to dive into who's been quoting me and how recently, some of these are as recent as yesterday or a couple days ago. So these might be pretty accurate, but comparing them. But even cooler, in my opinion, is we got carriers like this where this carrier has tried to quote us, where they've quoted us on this 243 times in the last 6 months. So what that tells me is I've got a carrier trying to work with me. Now they're a little bit high, and if I look into their history overall, I can see that they've always been a little bit high on the pricing in terms of what I normally get. But it allows me to look for opportunities to give these carriers a call and maybe give them some insight about like, hey, it seems like you want to run this lane. It would, if you can bring your price down a little bit, or maybe we could work something out with you to make this a real option, because 13 is too high compared to what we're normally getting. And even better, when I'm looking at this, if I want to tender this to a trucking company, I'm looking at my active quotes right now. I had put my target buy rate at 850, and I've got a 4-star carrier here. This is one that we rated, right? We rated as the broker. We have carrier scorecarding that allows you to feed a rating into here. So I see the 755. That's the carrier I want to go with. So I'm going to go ahead and select them, and I'm just kind of speeding through the process here. But I would select them, and then I can jump right up to my email function, and I can go to my carrier confirmation template, and I can fire this off and get it confirmed. They can electronically confirm from here, and then we can automate the dispatching. The cool thing is we also have an active record of the whole process that we went through in order to reach out to all the carriers. So in our activity log, you'll be able to see your team's outreach. So if you're telling them you want them to run through a certain process, you're able to verify that they went through it. And if I need to email the The customer, same thing. I can jump in here and I can email the quote response to the customer. Margin's already added. They can accept the quote from here. And that allows you to leverage whatever your process is. So we have workflow automation that you can build within Tai. So if you need that to get automatically sent to a certain carrier or pushed out onto maybe like Parade or some kind of digital booking platform, you can do that just by, as soon as they accept it, we can push that out to sort of speed through the process. Now, we don't want to, if we do end up in a situation where we aren't able to find coverage for this load, maybe it's not a lane we run very frequently, super easy to just go ahead and get these posted out onto the load boards. You can offer a rate, you can put in any kind of comments, and it makes it so that it's easy to push that out. But the more important thing when you do post from Tai, you're able to still gather all of your active quotes. Even if you've never worked with these carriers, you can still gather all those active quotes right here on this list. So there's sort of a data play here as well. I'm able to see how many times I've been quoted, like the one I showed you down here. So if I am trying to build up my network on a particular lane, I want to make it easy on my team to do that. And I want to make it so they can gather data and then hopefully continue to go back to these carriers that are quoting them regularly, that seem to want to run this lane. And we get to build up our relationships with carriers across the board. So last thing I'll say here is that the compliance information is also right here. So you can do that on the back end. We have multiple integrations if you're using any of the tools out on the market for carrier compliance. But right here, we've got authority, insurance, safety, and packets. So on the fly, if I see a 4-star carrier that is quoting me at 755 for a lane that's running on average 884, I'm good to go. That's a 4-star carrier. He's in compliance. I can go ahead and get this moved out to him. So there's a speed play, there's a data play, right? And there's also just a carrier relationship building, and that will ultimately lower your exposure overall to the carrier fraud that's been going on. Because if we're posting and praying, and one of the things I've been telling brokers lately is you can tell your carrier reps not to always depend on the load boards, but if we don't give them an easy way to go back to the same trusted, vetted carriers, then they're going to do the best they can. And if the best they can do is to continue to post and just go through sort of the normal process that's been the case for 30 years in our industry, then they're going to keep doing it that way. And we can tell them to do it a certain way, but if we give them an easy way, then we're actually empowering them to cover more loads in the way that we want them to cover it, going through the process that we want to give them. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there. That's just to give you the context around this page, but let's get into what I would say is the more interesting part, which is talking to Ryan about his overall process. So I'm going to flip over to some of the key highlights here from FreightSaver. But Ryan, could you maybe just give us sort of the background and tell us a little bit about what the process used to look like before you implemented this?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think, our carrier sales reps, everyone had a different process and everybody had a different carrier or different list. They would have their Excel list on their desktop. They tried sharing through Google Drive, things like that, to try to reutilize carriers when we first started, before we went on the Truckload volume page. We call it TVT. The battle station's great, but we actually call the tool Truckload Volume Tool. That's how we really developed its name inside our organization. And you talk about the load boards, and I think building relationships with carriers and reutilizing carriers sometimes is a little bit more difficult than just taking a posting call and negotiating with a new carrier and onboarding them and doing all of that stuff. So that's how the old process was, and I think that's what drove such small numbers per day per carrier sales rep, right? If you're thinking, my time at a big box broker that I worked for, 12 to 15 was a great number. And I always wondered why we would hover around 6 or 7. Now, a lot of our business for a long time was spot market. So, we didn't do a lot of static lanes, but I started diving in. Why are we so slow? Why are we so slow in booking loads? And I started to redevelop the entire process after that. It just too many moving parts.
Yeah, and I think you had told me that a lot of your team was that they were relying on load boards and they were using spreadsheets in order to keep track of their stuff. Can you talk a little bit about just the sort of the fragmentation that happens for brokers when they don't have an easy way to organize everything?
Well, I think, even though we had the TMS, right, they were still using those spreadsheets and those carriers that they thought were the right fit. But what happens is when you're doing that, you're not getting all of the information in a centralized point. So they may not be making good buying decisions. They may be overpaying the carrier. And it just got to the point where we needed to really have a centralized dispatch stream. And the truckload volume page was there. And I said, look, we're moving to TVT. And that's when we created the name. And we started to see a difference. It started to happen. And the low board situation, that's the nature of the spot market world. You post a load up that's available right now. I just felt that there was a much better way to do it than how we were doing it. And with the creation of the truckload page, when the TMS rolled it out, that was the first thing I started with.
Yeah, and for context, FreightSaver's actually been using Tai for quite a while, but we had done a lot of revamping on the truckload side about a little over 3 years, or probably like 4 years ago now, when we started really trying to dive in and help our truckload customers more. So it's pretty cool for your team to go from having leveraged as much of the TMS as they could into leveraging some of the improvements. What did that feel like for the team? Like when you started telling them, "Hey, we're gonna start doing things differently." I think a lot of brokers explain like the resistance that comes with trying to push a new technology on their team. Did you face that, and how did you deal with it?
I faced it, yes. Look, guys want to do it. Guys and gals want to do it their way, and they're like, "It's working. Why do we need to make a change?" And really having a centralized process was going to allow them to make more money. And I don't think everyone. It's like when you sell a large account or you get a new customer, all the sales guys want to say, "Well, how did you do it?" Well, once guys started to have success and their numbers started to go up month over month, it quickly got accepted as the new way of doing business, right? Because you had that leader, that one guy that really said, "Oh, I see what this is doing for me. I'm much more successful with quoting. I'm negotiating better with my carriers." And so it took some time, but as we started to have success, everyone jumped on board. They got on the bandwagon, and
Yeah.
we've seen a huge growth in our truckload during the last 4 years, right? So remember, when this came up is when we started that shift, and we've continued to see, even through these markets, a great increase in our truckload business.
Yeah, you told me a bit, and this is why we ended up wanting to bring you on to talk about your experience overall. But you were talking to our CEO about the doubling the bookings per person, and the margins actually going up along with it, because it's usually not the case. You start moving faster and spreading across. Sometimes you lower your margin just because you're trying to win more, but that wasn't the case with you. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how you went about, or what is it that's, I guess, making it easy for folks to book so many more loads per day?
Well, first off, it takes more time when you're posting loads and you're onboarding carriers and negotiating every quote, right? So when we use the email function and we're getting those quotes back, it's much easier for us to accept that quote from the carrier and onboard them today than it was, in the old process. So everything started building momentum and how they could double their daily bookings. I would sit here every day and think, gosh, we got the team's doing 6 or 7 a day. Why aren't we doing more? And now the team's up to about 14, 15 loads per day per carrier rep, which is in line with what I was used to in the industry. And I think the biggest thing is the speed. Now, the tool brings a lot of confidence, and you mentioned it in the start. You bring on a new carrier sales rep that may not be as savvy or as have the experience that some others do. The tool actually gives them so much valuable information that they're able to be much better on the sale front side if they're quoting the customer, but really on the negotiating side with the carrier. We found that our buying system and our buying power has gotten better with our carriers, and we're buying more in line with the market than we were prior. I think, for a little while there, negotiating every rate was probably not the best thing for us from a pricing standpoint. But once we got everyone on the page and that data and that information was there, we started buying better, we started selling better, which allowed us to win more loads and really book loads with more confidence, right? If you throw a number out there, am I going to get the load covered for this number? And what you tended to find was people would quote numbers that were higher just so they could cover the load. And getting them on TVT on the page and allowing them to see that data and to be confident in what we were putting in there, we've been much better at being at the market, giving our customers the right price and paying our carriers what the market rates are.
Yeah. So do you end up having, it definitely, that's been the sentiment, that it gives folks more confidence. So they don't necessarily have to, when they're training a newer rep that comes on and they want them to follow their process, there's less of this needing to run over to the more seasoned guy and just kind of verify that it sounds like, this price looks right, or there's less, I guess, investigation because it's all right in front of you. That's what we tend to hear. So is that the main part of the confidence aspect of it?
Yeah, if you think about it, if you just assume, like the old days, we needed to know what the rates were and what the lanes were, right? It was, you had spreadsheets back then and things like that. But it does give the confidence for we don't need to have everything verified. And keep in mind, there were reps and there were carrier sales reps before they would quote customers would actually get rates from carriers first. Right. So imagine that delay in a time where transportation, and I've been in in this for a long time, so I've seen this transition. You got to get the quote to a customer in a more timely manner. And we found that guys were getting quotes just so they know what to quote the customer. And we changed that model, and it's allowed us to quote with confidence and win more business.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that, because that has been still a common practice. Not with everybody. I think there's a lot of brokers trying to shift over into a faster process to getting quotes back to their clients when they need to spot quote. Obviously, there's plenty of shipments for you guys coming in where it's already committed. But that has been a sort of a major thing in the industry. The less experienced broker, they feel like they've got to get a couple quotes from carriers to make sure that they're not misusing the margin. So to me, it just seems like a huge win if you kind of almost give them the flexibility to say, like, you got to make your best guess, but that only makes sense if you give them the right amount of data, in terms of what you put in front of them, to be able to see what the other brokers have been doing, or the other carrier reps have been doing within their on their team or on other teams, and then being able to compare that to the market intelligence. Are you is your team also using? Oh, good. You're going to add to that?
No, I'm saying absolutely. Everything you're saying there is spot on.
Yeah. Are you guys, I know, are using some other tools along with Tai in order to make this process faster as well. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the other tools you're using for rating and booking and things?
Yeah, I think, on your board, when you showed the sample of the TVT screen, I think we went all in with, making sure we had every tool available inside of the volume page. So we have our relationship with Sonar and Green Screens, and both of them provide great feedback from us, from confidence scores and things like that. So what the page does is we start with, how do we buy in this lane, and we're seeing that at the very top. And then we're looking at DAT, then we're looking at Sonar, and we're looking at Green Screens. And that information, you have to be savvy enough not just to take one or the other and decide, okay, in this lane, how do we buy in this lane? Is it a lane we move frequently? Are we going to have more of our own options available? Are we going to a load board? And so we piped all of that in there. It also gave us the ability to have some digital bookings. So if you think of us emailing, and you did a great job explaining the emailing process of what we do inside the volume page of emailing our current carriers. They get that email, they get the bids back, and then we supplement that with a little bit of digital capacity with Parade and Cargo Chief. And so we've kind of developed this platform that utilizes those three areas, and we're finding we're getting more and more of our quotes coming back. About 38% of our loads have some type of digital or email return of quotes, which is pretty good, and it rises every month. So that tells me the industry is going more and more to this, and we also see those rates come back cheaper. So like when we email from the Truckload volume page to our network, and we have our target rate, our rates will either come back with what we've put as our buy cost, or lower, like in your example. And it's taken the human factor of negotiation out. You know, in carrier sales, sometimes pressure makes how you buy. But if a carrier comes back and it's the right price for them, and they've accepted the load, or they've given us a quote on that load, we're able to reduce our cost. I think we're making about 3% more margin on loads where carriers submit quotes versus when guys are negotiating the rates back and forth.
And that's huge, because I was thinking we talk pretty heavily when we're demoing to newer brokers, or to brokers that are newer to Tai. We demonstrate a lot the confidence factor. Like, if you could look at all this data, how quickly could you get that back? But it also sounds like, because you're leveraging so many tools, you're actually coming in where there's less negotiation overall, because you're actually getting the price right. Is that kind of what you're explaining?
Yeah, right. So if we price it where the market should be, and that means we're not just putting up a low ball price to a carrier and we're trying to get them to send an email back. We're a firm believer at FreightSaver that if it works for the customer and it works for the carrier, it will always work for us, right? And I know that's easy to say, but that's been our motto for 30 years, that it's got to work for both of them to work for us. And so we found when we price the loads correctly, and this starts the whole thing of volume, the volume page, the information there is so valuable to when we decide what we want to pay, and it helps us book more loads. We've doubled our output. We're making a little bit more margin in some cases, right? You still have negotiations on others, and the guys are able to quickly get loads dispatched faster.
Yeah, that's awesome. What's a common thing I see amongst successful brokers is just the importance they place on, like you mentioned, the philosophy being like, it's got to be right if it's right for the shipper, if it's right for the carrier. Sometimes you don't hear that. Sometimes it's like, we got to win with her, and then kind of not necessarily take as good a care of the carrier. But that hasn't been the case for you, and that hasn't been the case for most successful brokers that I talk to, especially in this market. Really put a heavy emphasis on the relationships with carriers. Can you tell us a little bit about just how this process has bettered your relationships with the carriers?
Well, we're giving carriers more business. We're building relationships. I think when you take that post and pray model, and you're just using a new carrier every day. And, I love when everyone says, I've got 52,000 carriers. And if they really drove down into their, subset of data, they're not using that many. It's just that's how many they've had onboarded. I think what we learned is that if you can start to build relationships with carriers, really support them as a partner, they're helping you support your business to your customer. And that's kind of how we've always been. And I think that's why it's been easier to get our team away from the load boards. Look, I'm a true believer. I remember being on a load board when I would call in and say I need 4 truck stops, and it would cost me $18.25 for that load that week. There's a need for them. But the fact is when we use the tool and we have the lead time, we're able to work with our carrier network, reutilize their equipment, be much better partner to them than if we're just always posting and praying and getting carriers. And I think the fraud aspect that you brought up has been one for me that we've invested heavily into processes to try to reduce that the best. And to be honest, the best thing that didn't cost anything was reducing our need for loads out on the load boards.
Yeah. And I know, I know that there'll always be a place for the load boards, of course, when especially when you're trying to build up on a certain lane that you don't normally run. And I know the load boards have done a lot of work to deal with the fraud aspect, and they've done a good job. It's been rampant, unfortunately. And so that's what I've been talking to brokers quite a bit about. I mean, we integrate with the tools that have been out there that have been hot this year in terms of reducing your exposure to that. But like you said, best way to reduce your exposure is to make it really easy for your team to go back to the same trusted carriers that you've already vetted, you've already worked with. Now, you can still end up in schemes. Like you could get an email from somebody who looks slightly, it's almost the carrier's email, but it's a little off. So there's little stuff like that everybody always has to look out for. But if you can reduce your exposure by 15%, that's a big win, right?
Yeah, we've done that over the last year and a half. We've continued to drive better carrier utilization through our network and our partners, and the truckload volume tool page is the big reason for that.
Yeah. Well, before we open it up to questions, just could you maybe just give anybody who's tuning into this that is feeling like they are not booking enough per rep and they're not efficient enough, what kind of advice would you give them if they're doing pretty well, they're in a good position, but they know they could be winning more and they're looking for ways to be more efficient? What kind of advice would you give them?
It's hard because every system's different. Every group of customers is different, right? If I had any advice that I give my team is, this is a game and you have to show up every day and understand that some days are easy, some days are hard, and you just got to power through it. You got to believe in your process, believe in the technology. And that was, if we go back to your initial question, getting people to believe in everything. Are these rates right? Is the history right? Are these carriers going to respond, right? Now that everyone's seen that confidence level is so much higher. So just stick with your process, stick with, what you're doing, and don't shy away from opportunities like this. If you're not using this tool and you're not bundling some of these other resources that you guys have integrated with flawlessly, by the way, we seldom have any problems with the integrations, and it has sped us up. I mean, if I go back, it used to be 45 minutes to onboard a carrier. 45 minutes. A carrier rep would have to wait, exchange paperwork back and forth. Utilize tools. Keep looking to see how your tools can fit your brokerage and the business you're bringing in better.
That's awesome. I appreciate you being here and being willing to share your experience. I guess even before we turn it over, anything I didn't ask you about that you feel like I should have, like any big wins that you feel like I didn't ask you about?
No, I think for us, like I said, we were always great spot market. We were always great at spot market freight because our motto was we're going to do whatever we need to get get that load booked. I think when you see us doubling and having the success we're having from a truckload perspective, this tool and the data and the information that we're using that's out there has allowed us to be more competitive in static lanes and in managed transportation. And those have been huge drivers to our success. And that's why, 3 years ago, I sat in Pittsburgh with you and Mitch and the team, and I looked and I just felt like we were not doing what we could to be as successful, and I went all in. And it's an investment, but it's been worth it.
Yeah, and it's tough to get brokers to adopt a whole new process, but we have a lot of success when when folks adopt the system to and use it the way the way it's intended, right? Because if you take Tai and you try to use it sort of the old way, where you still got the spreadsheets and you're still kind of walking through, like when folks do switch over to a new TMS, a lot of times it's a great opportunity to find out process wise what are we doing, because if we completely try to flex to your old process, then we're not really helping you fix anything. So we do spend a lot of time trying to sort of win the entire team over, like you did, where you got some champions on the front end that got some wins, and then everybody was curious how they got those wins. And that really is the way to do it. It's not easy to implement change, but when you do it right, like you guys have, it like you said, it doubles. You can double freight bookings per rep, which is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about a champion. One of our guys ended up having like a 350 load month. That's pretty good, right? And he's like, well, how many calls? We looked at their we use data. We analyze data all the time now. Well, how many outbound calls did he have? His outbound calls was half of someone who did half their work. Now, why was he able to, have less calls and book more loads? Because he was using Tai and the TVT tool and engaging his carriers and going back and forth and having more of his loads booked digitally than any other broker. So, that email function and rate function and the bolt-ons have been, great. So that's just an example of everyone wanted to be like that guy and how are you doing it? And it just kind of caught on.
Yeah, that's such a huge win. And that's, I guess, the last thing I'll say before we open up to questions is that's really what our philosophy at Tai is. We want to take what your team is doing and the rock stars that you have and be their best sidekick in terms of like helping them do more. Because that's been the theme over the last the last year here is things are tight. People want to be more efficient. You don't necessarily want to increase your labor costs, but you want to be able to do more and win more. And if you trust the team that you have, if we can find a way to, whether it's with Tai or not, for anybody who's on, if you can find a way to empower the rock stars within your organization, that's the win, right? As opposed to throwing more bodies at it or any of that kind of stuff. So,
for sure. All right,
cool.
It looks like we have some questions.
We do.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, I was just going to say, guys, if y'all have questions, go ahead and put those in your Q&A box in your webinar console, and we will make sure we get to those. And guys, if y'all are ready, we'll hop in.
Yep.
Let's do it.
All right, cool. All right. Ryan, I'm assuming this one's for you. You'll kind of touch base on this, but let's just kind of follow up.
Yeah.
How did you get your team to adopt this method?
I think it was a lot of, getting them to understand that the direction of the company was heading to a more, truckload centered company, and that we were our sales force was going to attack a different type of business that needed a new approach to how we can. I have my phone off, so sorry about that. How we could attack that. So it took a while to get everyone to kind of leave their own ways, but like I said, after 60, 90 days, everyone was on board. The tool's really easy. It's not a real hard sales pitch to get them to understand, look what I'm giving in front of you. You're going to make more money. So
and that's true about how we talk to brokers when they're thinking about switching over to Tai. We always recommend, rather than trying to move them too quickly, we always recommend like loop in your key stakeholders, the folks that are, whether they have a leadership title or not, who's sort of an influencer usually on your team and who's been around for a while, and we got to get them involved in the decision making process. Make sure that they feel like it's a win as well. Part of our job is winning over your whole team, not just, obviously we need the help and support from the folks that have already bought into, this methodology, but it's good if you can make your team part of the decision-making process and they don't feel like it was forced. They got to see what the win would be.
Absolutely. I agree.
Excellent. All right. Moving on to the next one. How long did it take to implement the process?
Not very long. I think implementation for us on the page had been, it's evolved over time, because as the one thing I like about Tai is it's not a set it and forget it TMS, right? We built this there's always improvements being made, little functionalities and things that they take, and I'm assuming from customers like myself or other customers. So the implementation was fast. Again, it was really just changing the culture. And, month over month, we just got better. We got everyone onboarded in that first 90 days. And from that point on, people just started to be in there all the time. So if you want to use 90 days, that's probably long. But that's a solid number.
Yeah, and I don't think, even if it's a brand new implementation, I don't think that time frame is uncommon. We have done them as quick as a week for, like some of the relatively smaller brokers, or if they're only bringing it on for a portion of their team. But I think 3 months is a good sort of time frame. One of the things that about probably a little over a year ago, we've been gaining quite a bit of steam over the last few years. And about a year ago, when the market was heavy, we brought on a lot of customers all at once, and we're a little understaffed for it. And over the last year, we've done a complete overhaul on the onboarding side, and our onboarding team has done a great job. We have a lot more people with a lot more experience, and so to deal with the demand, we completely revamped that team, and now we have a really smooth, depending on how quickly really the broker wants to run, right? Like if your team is ready to go and they're ready to start training and get in there with us, it goes very smoothly and very quickly, compared to when we brought in so many customers all at the same time. I think it was about a year or so ago, when we had to kind of go through that overhaul process, but nice and smooth, simple process.
Awesome. All right, let's move on to the next one. Are you using the search criteria and the Truckload quoting tool? And what is your best practice in driving results with this search?
Well, I think this is kind of a couple different ways how you can drill down on the search criteria, right? If we want to go exact, depending on, exact, sometimes you're only going to bring up the lanes from that customer and that zip to zip. Some of the times I'll see the team do a 50-mile, a whole state, they'll adjust their search criteria. But really what they're doing is just, drilling down into what carriers for all of our customers, right? So that's the other thing I like about it, is even though that it's X customer is moving the load, when I'm in Truckload volume page, we're able to see all the loads for any of our customers in that lane, and what we've paid, and keep it consistent. So they're using it. I think the biggest success is finding the right carrier from drilling down and using that tool to instead of, doing the whole state or region or things like that, they're able to drill down and reduce that list of carriers. And that's their first calls, right? Or their first email.
Awesome.
I won't add to that. That was a good answer.
Okay, I was about to say, I was like, Sean, you want to add to it, or you want me to move
No,
on?
that was perfect. Yeah.
I agree. All right, good deal. Moving along. What is the biggest win for the customer experience?
For us, I think the biggest win is that customers rely on us to give them, quality pricing that's in line with the market. And I think the tool, like we talked in our conversation, is because I have so many data points there, billions of dollars of data that we're bringing into the system, with one taking into account how we buy in a lane versus what the other loads would have as a whole. We're able to quote the load correctly, quote it much faster, which means we have less issues when it comes to, how many times have 3PLs used the excuse, oh, hey, my carrier dropped, or hey, I can't get that covered. And it's only because they underquoted it, and they can't find a truck for what they quoted to win the business. So I think from a customer standpoint, they're getting better rates. They're getting they're getting the correct rates. I shouldn't say better, but correct rates. They're getting them much faster. And because we're using the system, we're able to cover it at the rates we quote them for.
Yeah. That's I'm glad somebody asked that question, because we talk about that. I mean, we spend a lot of time talking about carrier reutilization, getting loads covered, all that kind of stuff. But one of the things I've said on over the past year on some of the podcasts is the shipper doesn't necessarily care what TMS you're using, right? Like it's not necessarily a selling point to just give them the name of the TMS you use, but what's a win is if it's easy for them to send shipments over to you. So if they are already committed customers, being like an easy process for those EDIs getting shot across. Or the big win for us over the last year has been the email integration, because if you're getting a lot of emails from customers, the ability to just pull those emails in, put them on your task list, and speed through that process. And then even some of the automation around the tracking. So we've got a native texting feature that allows you to blast out a text message to the carrier if you're not already tracking it with one of the tools that we're integrated with, which we're integrated with most of the tracking platforms on the market. But just the speed and quickness of being able to get back to the customer and make them feel like, I got you, like you're totally taking care of this sentiment around it, has always been, I think, the biggest win for Tai customers when it comes to dealing with their clients.
It's funny you bring up trackings, and I know we don't always throw out attaboys, but we moved to Truck Stop, and we went to 85% of our loads right now with Truck Stop are digitally tracked, either through ELD or GPS. That's the highest success that I'd ever seen. And we used a couple of the other ones that you guys are integrated with. So I'll just throw that out there. So again, it's just having that button down system that's all together in one place is really what drives the customer experience with us. And we have customers that do both, that email, or we're fully integrated, or we still take some, believe it or not, we still have some customers that call us and give us information for loads. So still got some old school left in us. Yeah.
Yeah. In every brokerage, it's just part of the deal.
Never goes away.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to our next question. How can a newer brokerage best utilize this tool, given they have a lot less data and carriers in the system?
This is actually a great question. And I think this goes to what Sean was talking about. Look, spend the money and, get these rating systems and this data, this billions of dollars into your truckload volume page. And that's going to give you the confidence. And as you build more loads and you have more loads in your system, Tai is going to take that into account. So now not only are you going to have those, you're going to have what you're doing in those lanes. And remember, as you build your carrier network out and as carriers are putting these quotes in, they're storing those. So the more business you do, it just keeps growing and growing, and it gets better every day, right? The more data we continue to pull into our system, the better we get at Truckload. Even where we're at today, and the growth we've had, we're still pulling that in every day, and we're finding great partners from it.
Yeah, and just to, I think, add on to that, it's not that expensive to actually buy carrier data in terms of just what's publicly filed on the FMCSA. So if you know where a handful of carriers are located, you can actually load them in or start calling them, and but the goal being that if you're posting onto the load boards or you are leveraging a list that you got from somewhere of potential carrier options, the goal is that obviously you don't have all the network right away, but every time you post a load, our goal is that you get 5 or 6 quotes from that load that you posted, and you have an easy way to store it. So even if you only go with one of those carriers, at least next time you come back to that lane, you've got another, you've got 6 carriers that did try to quote you. So you know who's trying to work with you. And so like I said, the load boards will always have a place, it seems like, in this industry, and they do a good job overall in terms of their network effect. But if you don't give your team an easy way to gather that data, then it may be hard today because you don't have the data. But if you don't start doing something like this, then you're never going to have the data, right? It's so hard to build up. But if you win an opportunity with a customer today, you post it to load boards, you do a good job with it, you get to go back to that customer, and then hopefully you've called all those carriers and you have a feel for what what lanes they run, and it's just easier to build the network from this process.
Exactly. And the other thing with that is the system allows you to have, we don't talk the centralized place for that data, right? So you may have a couple different people or reps that are collecting that data on carriers, and they're not storing that information. So you're not building anything. That goes back to, hey, Billy over there has this great carrier. Well, how does Ryan know what Billy has? Now everything's in that portal. When you save it, as your organization continues to save those things, it just grows.
Yeah. And that's huge, because if you are starting a new team, or we get folks that either we get folks on both sides that are doing truckload and want to expand LTL, and they come to us for that, or vice versa. They were doing LTL and they want to expand truckload. So even if you're not brand new and you have enough money to bring on a few guys to really build out a truckload program, their ability to see each other's data is important. So I think that, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, we do one other thing here that was something that was new, and we have carrier sales that are booking the rates and everything, but we also have a carrier development department. So we may be, we take all of our data and all of our information, all of our lanes. So we just have carrier development that's using the tool, and we haven't talked about that today, or that department, but we use the tool in a totally different way than just trying to book loads. Carrier development's using that tool to build those relationships and pricing and lanes that we need for our clients. So we're executing on one side and using carrier development on the other side to continue to grow our network and to help us win more loads. So just a little different model, but the same thing. Get it in and use what's in front of you.
Love that. Ryan, thanks again for being willing to jump in and share your experience with the market and anybody who needed advice on being more efficient. And Emily, before I kick it back over to you, I just wanted to let everybody know, if you want to learn more about this, you can scan the QR code, or you can go to tai-software.com/battle station if you want to get more information. I'll kick it back over to Emily, but I want to thank everybody for jumping in and giving us your attention for an hour here.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. And I guess I should say, battle up.
That's right. Absolutely.
Thank you very much, guys. Good luck.
Excellent. All right, guys. Well, that is all the time that we do have for today. Thank you to everyone again for taking the time to listen in. And a big thank you to Sean and Ryan for sharing your insights with us today. I know your advice was very helpful for our audience. As a reminder, the recording of this webinar will be sent to everyone tomorrow via the email you used to register with. We hope you'll join us again for our next FreightWaves webinar. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, bye.